Hey everybody, welcome back to Conscientious Omnivore. My name is Pal. Today is a day of revolution. It's the end of March 15th today, and that marks a national holiday here in Hungary. Back in 1848, there was a revolution. And basically, without going into too many of the details, the revolution was really one of kind of independence against the Austrian Habsburg rule. And also kind of one of national independence for the Hungarian people, but also it was a lot of it had a lot to do with basically like liberty and kind of like freedoms for everyday people and rights. Up until that point, there was still like a feudal system. The aristocracy was very strong. There was very much a kind of like a pressure on common people. They didn't have the same legal protections. They didn't have anywhere near like equal rights to the nobility. There were different laws for them. The nobles didn't pay taxes. There were a whole bunch of inequalities that people were struggling against. There was a authoritarian kind of state. They did not have freedom of religion. So there were like a whole bunch of things that people were fighting against. And I really just kind of was doing a lot of thinking about these kinds of topics recently because I've been rereading a book that I read in college when I was taking a philosophy class. This is written by John Stuart Mill, and it's called On Liberty. This is just one of his like famous kind of essays or treatises on liberty, and it's really interesting. I remember liking this a lot when I read it, and I just kind of took this out the other day. It's one of the few books from college that I kept because I liked it, and it was very interesting. And I read a little bit kind of in the beginning, which I don't think I ever read in college. It was a little bit about the life of John Stuart Mill and the time that he was living in and kind of what was going on. And it's very interesting. So he was born in 18 something, I don't know, like early 1800s. I can't remember the exact date, but right at the beginning of the 1800s. And his father was deep into politics, and there was kind of already kind of like a reform movement going on in England at the time. And basically people were struggling with those same kinds of things that I just mentioned. There was definitely like a struggle between the classes. There was a lot of poverty. People wanted liberty and they wanted freedom. And a lot of people who were very progressive for that time, they kind of made the case for individual liberty and the right to be free from oppression and tyranny, either from nobles and or the government. And it's really interesting, and I think these topics are really poignant today. So regardless of what your political leanings might be, I think especially in countries that a lot of my viewers are from, so the US and the UK and other parts of Europe, there's a lot of stress going on, and it's been like this for decades. But I think things are coming to a head now where a lot of people are getting more involved in politics than were in the past, and they're waking up to the realities of kind of some of the ugly things that are happening in a lot of the countries throughout the world. And it's really interesting. I think there's a lot to learn from reading history. And I think the one thing that I just wanted to highlight is that there's this little part in the in the book where they're just talking about Mill's life. He ended up falling in love with a lady who was married and already had kids, and they had a relationship in which it was a situation where they were chaste lovers for 20 years. They basically ended up waiting until the lady's husband died, and then they married and came together. And they were very progressive. So this guy and his wife, it's basically, I just wanted to read this little section here that said they were militant feminists advocating sexual equality, peer marriage as a partnership between equals, and civil and political rights for women. Now, bear in mind that this is like 1820s when they're doing this. This was like shocking stuff. Although Mill spoke out for many controversial and unpopular causes in the course of his life, notably an end to Negro slavery and relief for the oppressed Irish peasantry, it was his advocacy of feminism and his relationship with Harriet that made him the target of ferocious abuse. He was flayed by intolerant public opinion where he was most vulnerable. Harriet was the one great love and friend of his adult life. So it's just really interesting that the most shocking thing that somebody could be doing is to basically be supporting his greatest friend in life, his wife, and basically just saying that people should have an equal chance and an equal opportunity, and regardless of whether they're man, woman, Irish, black, it doesn't matter, people should have a chance. And this is like really fascinating stuff. I'm going to do a whole video on this book once I've finished rereading it, because I think there's a lot to be said here for our modern day that we can learn. There's really interesting thoughts here on kind of the tyranny of the masses, and how you can basically protect the individuality and the freedoms and liberty of a minority group. Really fascinating stuff. But anyway, the way I wanted to tie this together with the Hungarian Revolution of 1848 is that I think really a lot of the key people in that revolution on the Hungarian side, they were probably contemporaries of this train of thought. One of the key figures was István Széchenyi. He was a count, and he was actually very progressive, part of the kind of like aristocracy, and he had spent time actually living in the UK and elsewhere, I believe, in Western countries, and there were just a lot of parallels from what I know of Széchenyi and what I am now kind of reading about from Mill. And it's just fascinating stuff. I have this idea, which I've talked about a little bit before, maybe, that there's kind of so much information out there, and so many different people, and we all have different views and takes on things. But I think when you come across people who are like really smart and kind of present the same idea, like irrespective of border, time, culture, and all these kinds of things, when you hear the same kind of message from so many different kinds of people in different parts of the world, different times, it's really kind of like driving home a point to me that they've found something that is like a universal truth, something that really means something, and that you can't really put your finger on it exactly, but somebody might say it this way and somebody might say it that way, but they're really saying the same kind of thing. And this kind of idea that people have the right to be free and live their life unencumbered by the tyranny of the masses and an authoritarian government is a really powerful message. And I think we need to kind of go back to this idea of revolution in both cases of what Mill was writing and what was happening in the Hungarian Revolution. It was really kind of like a grassroots thing. They were going and people were advocating to the everyday person, common person, and people were making changes in their own life and doing what they could to basically like advocate their views and push their ideas. So as I mentioned, like the Count István Széchenyi, he actually put his money where his mouth was. So he did tons and tons of stuff in the country of Hungary, like for making things better, and he invested his own money. He convinced other noble people, other people with money to invest in things. A lot of the big kind of buildings, he was the first person to basically insist that like nobles pay their fair share. The chain bridge was actually built in large part from like his support and funding, and when they built that, they actually made everybody pay a toll, including the nobles, and it was like this big deal because I think up until that point they hadn't been taxed and they hadn't had to pay things like that. So this is just a very powerful message, and I think that's what I want to leave you with, that in today's day and age, you have so many things that are out of control and out of your control, and it's so difficult to kind of be involved and know what's going on in a lot of like the political kind of realms that exist. But what you do have control over is what you spend your time and energy and money on, and what you advocate for among your own friends. It's great to think globally, but it's really, really important to act locally. And as anybody who's been watching this channel for a while will know for sure, I advocate for for veganism and I certainly think that is something that is going to be won the same way. We're not going to affect change through legal means. We're going to affect change through our own kind of everyday interactions with the people we come across, and the people that we deal with in our everyday lives. And ultimately, the animal agriculture industries are simply performing a job. They're doing what the consumer is demanding. So if you convince enough consumers, the industry will change. They will start making other products. You've already seen a huge change from like dairy to plant-based milks. Same kinds of things are happening in meat production, and it's already underway. So I think these are just some of the things that you can affect. But this video isn't really just about veganism. What I'm encouraging you is to really kind of go beyond just the basic ideas of veganism or whatever kind of dietary choices you have. It's not just about those things. It's about affecting change, like for the environment too. Everybody can do more, and that's not to say you shouldn't try. I'm not saying like you're not doing enough, but what I'm saying is that there's things that you can do in your life that really have a big impact. And one of the big things that I want to encourage everybody who's watching is to go out and start growing your own food. It's like one of the most revolutionary things you can do. The more independent you can be of any of the kind of like big systems that are out there in control of so much of the world, the more you are able to basically live your own life the way you want to do it on your own terms. If if you can provide for your family from judicious growing in your own backyard, the more free you are. And that is something that I certainly want to pass on to my kids, the knowledge and just basically like the know-how of how to provide for themselves and take care of themselves regardless of what's happening in the world, because it's a crazy place and I don't know, crazy things are happening. So yeah, I think that's really kind of all I want to say is grow a garden, start your own revolution. I've talked about Fukuoka, Masanobu Fukuoka's book, The One Straw Revolution. And when I read that book, I've talked about this in a previous video, it was totally revolutionary for me. It opened up my eyes to kind of the joy of gardening and the importance of it. And, I'm going to be doing another video on another one of his books pretty soon. But that one is really great too. It's about the reversing of the desertification of the earth, and definitely has some revolutionary kind of points in there as well. So yeah, that's it. I just wanted to give you guys my take on some of these important kind of things happening in the world. For anybody who is getting discouraged because they're not seeing the change that they want in the world happening fast enough, I simply just leave you with this. Think about this, that Mill was advocating for the end of slavery in the 1820s. We had the Civil War in the U.S. We had the Emancipation Proclamation and ending slavery and declaring people free in 1860, whatever it is, I don't know, 3 or something like that. So I mean, if you were living in the 20s, in the 1820s, you may have thought that would never end. You would probably have just assumed it would just keep going forever. But then all of a sudden, boom, it changes, and now it's different. Same thing for like women's rights, getting the right to vote, all these kinds of things. People had to struggle for this, and they often had to face really, really difficult, repercussions and basically oppression by the majority. So don't give up. Keep doing what you know is right, and eventually, I think the truth always wins. People can only suppress the truth for so long, and it's bound to just get out there and shine in the light of day. So that's it. Hope you enjoyed this. If you did, remember to give it a big thumbs up, share it with your friends, and I hope to see you guys in the next one. Thanks.